My old high school best friend Marla tried staging a family meeting with my uncle to guilt me into letting her freeload longer. I smiled, told her, "You've got 3 weeks left," and walked past her while she stood there looking ready to explode. You wouldn't believe how fast your whole life can get turned upside down. For me, it started with a knock on the door that I should have never answered. My name's Ivy Carter. I'm 35 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dayton, Ohio. I work full-time as a paramedic, and when I'm not patching people up or pulling double shifts, I'm trying to raise my 7-year-old son, Theo, on my own. The night Marla showed up was one of those cold spring evenings where the air still stung your skin if you stayed out too long. Theo was sitting cross-legged on the couch, deep into his dinosaur books, when I heard the knock. I opened the door, and there she was, Marla Preston. I hadn't seen her in over a year, but even if I'd been blind, I could have smelled the trouble rolling off her. "Hey, Ivy," she said, her voice all fake bright like nothing was wrong. Behind her, wedged between 2 overstuffed duffel bags, stood her kids, Sadie, about 9, and little Mason, who couldn't have been older than 5. They both clung to her legs like barnacles. For a second, I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Marla looked tired, the kind of tired that no amount of makeup could cover. But still, she smiled like we were 2 teenagers meeting up at the mall again, not 2 grown women with bills bigger than our dreams. She cleared her throat, shifting Mason onto her hip. "We just need a place to crash for a few nights. Just till I figure things out." I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But instead, I felt the guilt creeping up, thick and suffocating. Memories of high school came rushing back, nights when Marla covered for me when I snuck out, afternoons she brought me scraps from her mom's kitchen when mine forgot dinner. Old debts. Old loyalties. Of course, I heard myself say, stepping aside. "Come in." Marla squeezed my arm with a grateful smile. "I knew I could count on you." Theo poked his head around the corner, his little face lighting up at the sight of new kids. "Hi," he chirped, already bounding over to them. Marla dropped her bags with a heavy thud and plopped down on my couch like she'd just gotten home after a long shift. Sadie and Mason followed, sprawling out like they owned the place. "We won't be in the way," she said, pulling a bag of half-eaten chips from her purse and tossing it to Mason. I nodded stiffly, telling myself it was temporary. Just a few nights. What was the big deal? But already, a knot twisted in my stomach. It wasn't just the bags, those were packed for a long haul. It wasn't just the way she said crash like she'd done it 100 times before. It was something deeper, something I didn't want to name yet. Theo, bless him, didn't notice. He just grabbed his dinosaur books and plopped down next to Sadie, jabbering excitedly about velociraptors. "You still working those crazy shifts?" Marla asked casually, kicking her sneakers off onto my rug. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Paramedic life. You know how it is." "Must be nice," she said, stretching out and popping a chip into her mouth. "Steady paycheck, benefits, wish I had that." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What could I say? Sorry your cupcake business folded? Sorry you bet everything on a dream and lost? Instead, I just nodded and busied myself clearing off the kitchen table, even though it didn't really need clearing. "You look good though," she added, grinning wide. "Little older, sure, but still Ivy." The old Marla charm. I felt it pulling at me, the way it always had. Making me forget, making me doubt. I told myself again it was just temporary. A few nights. She needed me. And I owed her. Right? The next morning, I woke up to find her in the kitchen, frying bacon like she'd lived there for years. Her kids were still passed out on the couch. Theo was giggling over something Marla had said. "Morning, sunshine," she chirped, tossing a piece of bacon onto a paper towel. "Hope you don't mind, I found the groceries." I minded. I minded so much it made my skin itch. But I smiled anyway and poured myself a cup of coffee. "Smells good," I said, though it tasted like guilt and fear and too many memories. Over breakfast, Marla talked about finding work eventually, about maybe looking for a place when things settle down. She didn't mention job applications. She didn't mention leases. She didn't mention a plan at all. And as she laughed and poured syrup over Mason's pancakes like she was queen of the castle, I realized something that made my coffee turn sour in my stomach. She wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. It's crazy how fast a few days can turn into a few weeks when you're too tired to fight it. Marla settled into my apartment like she was paying rent, which she wasn't. Her kids took over the living room. Mason's toy trucks were scattered across the floor like landmines. Sadie started hogging Theo's tablet without even asking. At first, I told myself it was fine. They were just kids. It was just temporary. But as the days stretched into weeks, that lie got harder and harder to swallow. It wasn't just the mess. It was everything. I'd come home after a 14-hour shift, dog-tired and dreaming of 5 minutes of silence, only to find the TV blaring some loud cartoon, empty chip bag stuffed between the couch cushions, and my fridge, bare. Again. The first time, I let it slide. Maybe they were hungry, I thought. Maybe they didn't realize how tight things were for me and Theo. But the third time I opened the fridge and found nothing but a half-eaten yogurt and a bottle of mustard, something inside me cracked. One night, I dragged myself through the front door, dropped my keys on the counter, and just stood there staring at the empty shelves. The kids were laughing in the living room. Marla was stretched out in my favorite chair, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "You guys, eat everything?" Marla glanced up, gave a little shrug. Kids were hungry. "I get that," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But maybe next time we could, I don't know, plan a little better?" Marla laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. "You're acting like it's the end of the world, Ivy," she said, shaking her head. "You make good money. You can afford a little extra food." I blinked at her, stunned. Good money? Did she think paramedics were out here living like Kardashians? Half the time, I was praying Theo wouldn't get sick because I couldn't afford another ER bill. "You know," Marla added, leaning back and folding her arms, "not everyone's lucky enough to have a stable job and a steady paycheck. Some of us had dreams." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it tasted like blood. Dreams? Was that what she was calling it now? Quitting 3 jobs to open a cupcake truck she couldn't afford? "I'm not saying no one can eat," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm just asking for a little help. Maybe you could pitch in for groceries until you get back on your feet." Marla snorted like I had just told the world's funniest joke. "You're unbelievable," she said, setting her phone down. "You really gonna nickel and dime me? After everything we'd been through?" I felt Theo's eyes on me from the hallway. He was clutching his stuffed T-Rex, looking nervous, like he could tell a storm was coming. I softened my voice, not wanting to scare him. "I'm not trying to nickel and dime anybody. You're just selfish," Marla cut in. Her voice was loud, sharp enough to make Theo flinch. "You've always been selfish. You act like you're some big martyr because you work long hours and pay your own bills." Boo-hoo. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't Marla lashing out because she was stressed. This was Marla showing her true colors. The next morning, I found a note on the counter written in Sadie's crooked handwriting. "Mom says we can take what we need because you owe her anyway." I sat down at the table and just stared at it for a long time, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. I kept trying to convince myself it was temporary. That Marla would snap out of it, start pulling her weight. But every day that passed, she seemed more relaxed, more comfortable, like my apartment was hers and I was just some annoying roommate she had to tolerate. The worst part was how easily Theo accepted it. He adored Sadie and Mason. He didn't understand the tension. He just saw new playmates and a house full of noise instead of the quiet loneliness he and I were used to. One night, after another double shift, I found Theo curled up asleep on the floor with Mason, both of them snoring under a blanket. The sight made my heart ache. They looked so peaceful. So safe. And yet, all I felt was trapped. I tucked Theo into his own bed, brushed the hair off his forehead, and kissed him goodnight. Then I stood in the doorway, staring out into the darkened living room where Marla was passed out on my couch, TV remote still clutched in her hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack her bags, toss them onto the sidewalk, and bolt the door behind her. But something heavy and ugly kept me frozen in place. Guilt. History. Fear of what would happen if I pushed back. Instead, I turned out the light and whispered into the darkness, just a little longer. Just until she gets it together. But deep down, I knew. She never would. It's strange how the past sneaks up on you when you least expect it. One night, about 6 weeks into Marla's stay, I came home exhausted after a triple shift. My head was pounding. My feet felt like they didn't even belong to me anymore. All I wanted was a shower, a sandwich, and 5 minutes of peace. Instead, I walked in to find Marla sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of my wine, laughing with someone on speakerphone. Theo sat at the end of the table, coloring, but when he saw me, his smile slipped. "Hey, Ivy," Marla said without even looking up. "Don't forget, we're low on groceries again." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud, like a gunshot. It was quiet, like a piece of thread finally giving way after too much pulling. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice tight. Marla waved a hand, still grinning into her phone. "Can it wait?" "I'm busy." Theo looked between us, nervous. "No," I said. I dropped my bag onto the counter harder than I meant to. "It can't." Marla sighed like I was the burden here. She ended the call, set the phone down, and folded her arms across her chest. "What's your problem now?" she asked, all fake sweetness. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. "I never agreed to raise your kids," I said, my voice trembling from exhaustion and anger. "I said you could stay a few nights." "It's been over a month, Marla." Marla leaned back, laughing like I'd just told the best joke of the year. "God, Ivy," she said, shaking her head. "You're so dramatic. You're acting like taking care of a few extra kids is some huge hardship. You're not exactly living in a mansion, you know. You should be grateful for the company." I stood there, stunned. Grateful? For being used? For having my life steamrolled? Theo set down his crayon, his small hands clutching the edge of the table. "Mom," he whispered. My heart broke a little at the fear in his voice. "You don't get it, do you?" I said quietly, staring Marla dead in the eyes. "You've been doing this to me my whole life." Marla scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Saint Ivy with her big martyr act. You left me to clean up your messes back when we were kids," I said, my voice rising. "Every time you screwed up, it was me who got blamed. Me who covered for you. Me who tried to fix everything while you left and moved on." Marla rolled her eyes. "Oh please. You act like I forced you." "You didn't have to," I said. "You knew I would. You still know." For a second, something flickered across her face, something sharp and cruel. Then she leaned forward, her smile dripping with venom. "You're just mad because you're a failure," she said, her voice low and nasty. "You're stuck in this tiny, crappy apartment with a kid you can barely afford, and you can't even handle a little extra responsibility without falling apart." I opened my mouth to fire back, but Theo beat me to it. "Don't talk to my mom like that," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. The room went dead silent. Marla's eyes widened, like she hadn't expected Theo to stand up for me. Like she hadn't realized the wreckage she was causing even reached him. I knelt down next to Theo, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, baby," I said softly, even though it wasn't. It really wasn't. I stood up, facing Marla squarely. "You have no idea what it's taken for me to hold this life together," I said. "No idea what I've given up. And you think you can just waltz in here, take and take and take, and spit in my face when I finally say enough?" Marla didn't answer. She just stared at me, jaw tight. "You're right about one thing," I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. "I'm tired. Tired of carrying everyone else while you float through life like it's some big joke." I turned to Theo, who was still glaring at Marla with all the fury his little body could hold. "Come on, kiddo," I said. "Let's go grab dinner somewhere. Just us." Theo nodded and grabbed his jacket without a word. As I opened the door, I looked back one last time. Marla sat there, arms crossed, mouth twisted into a bitter sneer. She didn't apologize. She didn't thank me. She didn't even look sorry. And that's when I knew, this wasn't going to end on its own. I was going to have to end it. After that night, something shifted inside me. Not big, not dramatic. Just quiet. Like a lock clicking shut somewhere deep inside. I spent my next shift at the station mostly staring at the wall between calls, thinking back on everything. Not just the past month, all of it. All the years Marla had been a walking disaster and I'd been the idiot running behind her with a dustpan. It was the same story every time. She'd screw up, smile wide, and someone, usually me, would step in and save her. She never once stood on her own. Never once paid for her own mistakes. I thought about how she used to cry her way out of detentions at school, while I sat in the principal's office shaking with fear. I thought about how she showed up drunk at my graduation party, insulted my boyfriend, and somehow made me apologize. I thought about how, when I found out I was pregnant with Theo, Marla didn't offer a word of support, just joked that I'd finally have someone to boss around. God, how had I been so stupid? At 3 a.m, while the ambulance bounced down empty streets and my partner chatted about baseball, I made my decision. Marla had 1 more month. 30 days. After that, she was gone. No excuses. No guilt trips. No second chances. When my shift finally ended, I drove home as the sun came up, rehearsing the conversation in my head. I told myself it wouldn't be a fight. I'd be calm. Firm. Professional, even. Marla was in the kitchen when I walked in, barefoot, sipping the last of my coffee like it was hers. Mason and Sadie were already up, sprawled across the living room with cartoons blaring. I dropped my bag by the door and took a deep breath. "Hey, Marla," I said. "We need to talk." She turned around, blinking like I'd just interrupted her spa day. "What's up?" I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice even. "You need to start making plans. I can give you 1 more month, but after that, you'll need to find another place." For a second, she just stared at me. Then she burst out laughing. "Oh, Ivy, you're so cute when you try to act tough." "I'm serious," I said. She rolled her eyes and waved a hand dismissively. "Relax. We'll be out of here way before then. I've got some stuff in the works." I didn't ask what stuff meant. I already knew it meant nothing. "I mean it, Marla," I said, pushing past the lump in my throat. 30 days. I'm not extending it." She smiled lazily, like she knew better. Like I was a yappy little dog barking at a storm. Sure, she said, reaching for the sugar bowl to sweeten my coffee even more. "You do you, Ivy. No need for the dramatics." But I wasn't being dramatic. Not this time. I watched her walk away, barefoot and smug, like she owned the place. Like she always had. Theo wandered in a minute later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, voice small. I crouched down and hugged him tight, feeling his skinny arms wrap around my neck. "I'm fine, buddy," I said, even though I wasn't. Not yet. But I would be. If I thought setting the boundary would make things easier, I was dead wrong. Marla didn't pack a single bag. She didn't even pretend to start looking for a place. Instead, she turned into a master of guilt tripping, like it was her full-time job now. She started with the sighs. Long, dramatic, stage-worthy sighs every time she walked past me. She left dishes piled high in the sink like a middle finger. She forgot to pack lunches for Sadie and Mason, leaving it for me to notice right before the school bus came. When I pointed it out, she shrugged. "I mean, you're already making one for Theo," she said sweetly. "What's 2 more sandwiches?" The way she said it made it sound like I was the bad guy for even hesitating. Then came the real show. One evening after dinner, a dinner, by the way, that I paid for and I cooked, Marla flopped down dramatically on the couch, wiping imaginary tears from her eyes. "I just don't get it," she said loudly enough for everyone, including the kids, to hear. "After everything we've been through together, you'd think Ivy would have a little more compassion. A little more loyalty." Theo froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Sadie and Mason exchanged glances. I set my plate down carefully. 1 month, I said calmly, not rising to the bait. "You agreed." Marla sat up straight, tossing her hair over her shoulder like she was about to deliver an Oscar-winning monologue. "You're ruining our friendship, Ivy," she said, her voice breaking fake and loud. "You're throwing away 20 years of history over, what? A little help?" I wiped my mouth with my napkin and stood up. 1 month, I repeated. "That's the deal." Her eyes narrowed. For a moment, just a flash, the real Marla surfaced, cold, bitter, calculating. And then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The next morning, the ambush started. It began with a call from a mutual friend, Jenna, who I hadn't heard from in months. "Ivy, honey," Jenna said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I heard Marla's having a really hard time. Is everything okay? Maybe you could be a little more patient? I mean, you've always been the strong one." I ended the call as politely as I could without screaming. Then Marla went bigger. That weekend, I walked into my own living room to find a family meeting waiting for me, complete with Marla, her 2 kids, and, shockingly, my Uncle Ray, who I hadn't seen in 3 years. Uncle Ray, who I barely talked to even on holidays. Marla stood up like she was hosting an intervention. "Ivy," she said solemnly. "We're all worried about you." Theo tugged at my hand, confused. "What's happening, Mom?" I squeezed his fingers gently. "I don't know, buddy," I said. "Let's find out." Uncle Ray cleared his throat awkwardly. "Marla tells us you're struggling," he said, shifting in his chair. "That you're overwhelmed and maybe not thinking clearly. Maybe you're forgetting what family means." Family. That word again. Always used like a leash. I smiled tightly. "Is that so?" Marla stepped forward, clasping her hands dramatically. "I just want you to see how much you mean to us," she said, her eyes wide and glossy with fake tears. "We love you, Ivy. We just don't want you to make a decision you'll regret." I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I smiled, for real this time. A cold, clean smile. "You want to talk about decisions?" I said. "Okay. Let's talk." I turned to Uncle Ray. "Did she tell you I've been paying for everything for the past 2 months?" I asked. His mouth opened, then closed. "Did she mention I'm working 60-hour weeks to keep my own kid fed, while she sleeps until noon and plays on her phone?" Ray glanced at Marla, uncomfortable. "And did she tell you," I said, my voice rising just slightly, "that the few nights she promised have somehow turned into 2 months of freeloading, gaslighting, and disrespect?" No one said a word. Marla's smile cracked. I turned back to her. "You think bringing back up will scare me?" I said. "It won't. It just reminds me why I set the deadline in the first place." I looked around the room, at the awkward, guilty faces, at Theo standing proud and strong by my side. "1 month," I said, locking eyes with Marla. "And now, you've got 3 weeks left." I picked up Theo's hand, gave it a little squeeze, and walked straight past them without looking back. I heard Marla's voice calling after me, shrill and desperate. But I didn't turn around. Not this time. If Marla thought that little family meeting would scare me back into submission, she had another thing coming. For the next few days, she laid low, way too low. No guilt trips, no dramatic sighs. She was careful, polite even. It was like living with a rattlesnake that decided to play dead. I knew it was only a matter of time before she made another move. I just didn't know it would be so public. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was coming home from a brutal shift, dreaming about nothing more than kicking off my boots and binge-watching cartoons with Theo, when I pulled into the parking lot and saw them. Marla, Sadie, Mason, and about 6 other people standing around the lawn in front of my building. Mutual friends. Distant cousins I barely spoke to. Even my old high school acquaintance, Melissa, who I hadn't seen since 2017. They were all there. Waiting. Marla spotted me and practically ran to meet me, waving her arms like some desperate game show contestant. "Ivy. So glad you're home," she called out loudly enough that people walking their dogs stopped to stare. Theo, sitting in the back seat, looked up nervously. "Mom? What's happening?" I squeezed his hand. "Nothing we can't handle," I said quietly. I got out of the car slowly, locking it behind me. Marla launched into a full performance the second my feet hit the pavement. "We're all here because we care," she said, her voice trembling just the right amount. "We're worried about you. About the kids. About how isolated you've become." I looked around at the little crowd. Some faces looked concerned. Others just looked uncomfortable, like they realized too late they'd walked into something messy. "You're not acting like yourself," Marla continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're pushing people away who love you. Who need you. Theatrics worthy of an Emmy." I let her finish. I let the murmurs ripple through the crowd. I let the judgmental glances hit me like little pebbles. And then, when the silence fell, I stepped forward. You know what? I said, keeping my voice calm and clear. You're absolutely right. Marla blinked, caught off guard. I'm not acting like myself, I continued. I'm acting like someone who's finally done being used. There were a few uncomfortable shuffles. I turned slowly, making sure everyone could hear me. Let me tell you all something, I said. For the last 2 months, I've been working 60-hour weeks, covering every single expense in that apartment. I've paid for the food, the electricity, the school supplies. I've tucked kids into bed that aren't mine, cleaned up messes I didn't make, and gone without sleep so that Marla could have a roof over her head. I looked directly at Marla, who was standing frozen, her fake tears forgotten. And in return? I got mocked. I got guilt-tripped. I got called selfish in my own home. The crowd was dead silent now. I turned to Melissa, who shifted awkwardly under my stare. Did she tell you that? When she called you to come help? Melissa shook her head slowly. I turned to the others. Did she mention that she promised it would be a few nights? I asked. And then just moved in? A couple people looked at Marla now, eyebrows raised. And when I finally set a deadline, I said, she started dragging anyone she could find into the middle of it. Hoping to shame me into backing down. I paused, letting the words settle. But here's the thing, I said, my voice steady as a rock. You can't shame someone who's finally telling the truth. Marla's mouth opened, desperate for a comeback. But I beat her to it. And if you don't believe me, I said, pulling out my phone, I've got screenshots of every grocery receipt. Every text. Every promise she broke. I didn't even have to show them. The point was made. The silence was deafening. Theo slipped his hand into mine, holding tight. Finally, Marla broke. The fake tears returned fast and furious. Ivy, you're abandoning us, she cried. You're turning your back on the only real family you have left. I stared at her, feeling nothing but a cold, clear relief. I'm not abandoning your kids, I said. I'm abandoning you. A gasp somewhere in the crowd. Marla took a step back like I'd slapped her. And for the record, I added, this isn't the first time Marla's pulled this stunt. She's been freeloading off people her whole life. Ask her old roommates. Ask her family. She bounces from couch to couch, draining whoever's kind enough to let her in. I started darting around now. Whispers. Marla's mask cracked, pure rage flashing across her face. You'll regret this, she hissed. I smiled. No, Marla, I said. I won't. I bent down, scooped Theo into my arms, and walked right past her, right past all of them, into the building. When I got inside and shut the door, I leaned against it, breathing hard. Theo hugged me tight around the neck. You did good, Mom, he whispered. I hugged him tighter. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. Marla had 2 weeks left. And no army of guilt or fake tears was going to change that. After the failed ambush, the house went eerily quiet. Marla must have realized that her old tricks weren't going to work anymore. So she switched tactics. Instead of open hostility, she played the trying card. It started small. One morning I woke up to find her in the kitchen, whistling while she cooked breakfast. She even made extra pancakes and left a plate for me on the counter. Thought you might be hungry, she said with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just nodded, picked up my coffee, and left for work without touching the food. That evening, she casually mentioned she was thinking about applying for some online jobs, didn't name any, didn't say when. Just floated it out there like it was proof she was changing. She even did the dishes. Once. I wasn't buying it. I had seen this show before. Marla was the queen of last-minute redemption acts when the walls closed in. But this time I wasn't the same Ivy. The month was almost up, and I counted down the days like I was scratching tallies into a prison wall. 2 weeks left. 1 week left. 5 days. And that's when the cracks started showing. The morning I reminded her, casually, calmly, that she had less than a week to move out, Marla's whole fake persona shattered like glass. Wow, she said, slamming her coffee cup down so hard the handle snapped clean off. You really are heartless. I looked up from my laptop. Heartless? I said, my voice even. For asking you to honor the agreement you made? Marla stood there, vibrating with anger. You think you're so high and mighty, she hissed. Just because you've got some little job and a tiny apartment. You think that makes you better than me? I closed my laptop slowly. This isn't about being better, I said. It's about finally being done. Marla shook her head, laughing bitterly. You've changed, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You used to care about people. I stood up, meeting her glare head-on. I still care, I said. But caring doesn't mean setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm. Her mouth twisted, looking for a comeback, but I didn't give her the chance. I'm just tired, I said simply. Tired of carrying someone who refuses to walk. Theo peeked around the corner then, clutching his T-Rex, his eyes wide and worried. I softened my voice immediately. I'm giving you until Saturday, I said, quieter now. That's more than fair. Marla opened her mouth like she was going to unleash hell, but when she saw Theo standing there, she swallowed it down. She stormed off to the bedroom she had taken over, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. Theo came over and slid his small hand into mine. Are we gonna be okay, Mom? He whispered. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. We already are, I said. The next few days were a whirlwind of Marla cycling through every emotional trick in her arsenal. First came the fake niceness again, smiling, leaving little notes, pretending to be the helpful roommate. I ignored it. Then came the guilt. Dramatic sighs, muttering under her breath about being abandoned and betrayed. I ignored that, too. When none of it worked, the rage came back. Screaming matches with Sadie and Mason over nothing. Stomping around the apartment like a teenager grounded for the weekend. Slamming cabinet doors just because she could. I stayed calm through all of it. Theo stayed close to me, like he could feel the walls shaking but knew we were stronger now. Saturday morning arrived like a storm cloud rolling in slow. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, as Marla dragged her duffel bags out of the bedroom one by one. She didn't look at me. Didn't speak. Fine by me. When she finally had everything piled by the door, she stood there, arms crossed, radiating hatred. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Throwing out your own family. You're gonna die alone, Ivy. You know that, right? I looked at her, feeling nothing but a hollow, tired kind of sadness. No, I said. I'm going to live. There's a difference. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was waiting for me to crack, to cry, to beg her to stay. But I didn't. Finally, with a growl of frustration, she yanked open the door and stomped outside, Mason and Sadie trailing behind her like tired little ghosts. I watched her load up her beat-up SUV, slam the doors, and peel out of the parking lot without so much as a goodbye. And then, silence. Real, blessed, golden silence. Theo crawled into my lap, pressing his head against my chest. We're really free now, he asked. I kissed the top of his head. We're really free, I said. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I actually believed it. The first thing I noticed when I came home that morning was the silence. Real silence. No blaring cartoons, no footsteps thundering across the ceiling, no Marla shouting at Sadie to quit touching things. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock over the stove. I stood in the doorway for a minute, almost afraid to move. Theo peeked out from behind me, rubbing his eyes. Is she gone? He whispered. I nodded slowly. Looks like it. The night before had been one last desperate act on Marla's part. After spending all day stomping around and muttering under her breath, she had knocked on my bedroom door around midnight. I hadn't even turned on the light. Just cracked the door open and stared at her standing there in the dark, her face drawn and hollow. Ivy, she said, her voice small. Please. Don't make us leave. Just, give me a little more time. For a second, just a second, old instincts kicked in. I could feel that familiar pull of guilt, of obligation, of history. The weight of all those years of being the one who never said no. But I didn't open the door any wider. I just shook my head. I'm sorry, Marla, I said quietly. But no. She stood there a moment longer, like she thought she could wear me down if she just stayed still enough. But I didn't move. Finally, she turned and walked away. And this morning, she was gone. No note. No apology. Not even a thank you. Just gone. Her bedroom door was open now, the mattress bare, a few scraps of paper littering the floor where Mason had probably been coloring. The closet door hung slightly ajar, empty. I picked up a crumpled piece of paper, a child's drawing of 4 stick figures, too tall, too small. One figure stood apart from the others. A pang shot through me, sharp and unexpected. I folded the paper carefully and set it on the kitchen counter. Theo padded over to me, barefoot, dragging his dinosaur plushie behind him. "Can we have pancakes?" he asked, his voice hopeful. I smiled. "Yeah, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "We can have pancakes." We made them together, just the two of us, in the quiet, sunny kitchen. Theo stood on a stool, cracking eggs with way too much enthusiasm while I tried not to laugh. It felt simple. Easy. Light. While the pancakes sizzled, I looked around the apartment, really looked. There were still stains on the carpet from spilled juice boxes. The faucet still leaked when you turned it too far to the left. The curtains were a little too short for the windows because I bought them secondhand at a garage sale last year. But it was ours. Our mess. Our home. And now, finally, it was our piece. As I sat down at the table with Theo, passing him a pancake drowning in syrup, I realized something that made my throat tighten. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next explosion. I wasn't tiptoeing around someone else's bad mood. I wasn't carrying the weight of another grown adult who refused to stand on their own. I was just, here. Present. Alive. Free. Theo grinned at me across the table, syrup smeared across his chin. "Best pancakes ever," he declared. I laughed, feeling something crack open in my chest, something I hadn't even realized had been locked up tight. "Best pancakes ever," I agreed. Life after Marla didn't feel like fireworks or big victories. It felt like breathing again after holding my breath for too long. The first thing I noticed was time. Real time. Whole Saturdays where I didn't have to play referee or clean up messes that weren't mine. Evenings where I wasn't stewing in silent resentment while someone else hogged the TV and emptied the fridge. Time that belonged to me and Theo. About a week after Marla left, I finally kept a promise I'd made to him months ago, one he never once whined about, even though I knew he wanted it bad. I took a day off, no shift trades, no extra hours, and we drove down to the Science Museum in Cincinnati. Theo spent the whole ride buzzing with excitement, his dinosaur plush buckled carefully into the back seat like a little brother. "You think they'll have real fossils, Mom?" he asked for the 5th time as we pulled into the parking lot. "I bet they will," I said, smiling. "Maybe even a T-Rex." His whole face lit up. We spent hours wandering through towering skeletons and hands-on exhibits. Theo ran from display to display, dragging me behind him, narrating everything he knew about pterodactyls and triceratops. At one point, he grabbed my hand and said, "I'm glad it's just us today." I squeezed his hand tight and swallowed the lump in my throat. "Me too, buddy," I whispered. After the museum, we ate ice cream for dinner, something Marla would have called irresponsible while helping herself to the biggest bowl. It wasn't just the museum, though. Little by little, everything started to feel lighter. Without Marla and her kids draining the budget, money stopped disappearing the minute I earned it. I finally had enough saved to call the handyman and fix the leak in the bathroom ceiling, the one that dripped every time it rained, keeping me up at night. One Saturday, Theo and I spent the afternoon at the hardware store picking out paint samples for his room. He picked asteroid blue, a bright, slightly ridiculous shade that made him practically bounce with excitement. "Are you sure?" I teased, holding up the swatch. "This is really blue. Dinosaurs would like it," he said solemnly, like it was the most important argument in the world. That settled it. We painted his room together, mostly meaning I painted, and he got more on the tarp and himself than the walls. But he was so proud, standing there with his little plastic roller. Standing in that bright blue room afterward, breathing in the faint smell of fresh paint and possibility, I realized something simple but huge. This was ours. Our mess. Our choices. Our home. I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone's moods. I didn't have to explain my every decision. I didn't have to beg someone to contribute or clean up after themselves. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was living my life. Theo's life. Our life. And it was more beautiful, more peaceful, and more real than anything Marla had ever tried to sell me. About a month after Marla left, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. No drama. No guilt trips. No late-night phone calls begging for another chance. It was like the whole chapter of my life had finally slammed shut. And then, one afternoon while Theo and I were making spaghetti and meatballs in our tiny kitchen, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up anyway. It was a text. The kids miss you. I can't believe you did this to us. For a second, my stomach twisted. Old habits die hard, I guess. But then I read it again. Really read it. It wasn't about missing me. It wasn't about being sorry. It was just another attempt to drag me back into the guilt, the responsibility, the endless cycle. I set the phone down carefully, took a breath, and typed back. I didn't abandon them. I abandoned you. I hit send without hesitation. There was no response. And just like that, the old weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying slid off my shoulders and disappeared. Later, I found out from Jenna, the same mutual friend Marla had dragged into the mess before, that Marla tried crashing at someone else's place not long after leaving mine. A woman from church. Some friend who had a spare room. It didn't last long. Apparently, once Marla's old patterns started showing, the sleeping in, the not paying a dime toward groceries, the endless excuses, she got kicked out within 3 weeks. Last Jenna heard, Marla had finally gotten a job waiting tables at a diner just off the highway. She wasn't happy about it, she told anyone who would listen that she was too good for that kind of work. But she was doing it. She was surviving. Without me. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt relief. Real, pure, bone-deep relief. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something I should have known a long time ago. Cutting someone off doesn't mean you're cruel. It means you finally realize they were never willing to save themselves, not while you were still willing to carry them. Theo ran over then, dragging a messy, spaghetti-smeared plate across the counter. Look, Mom. I made a volcano, he said proudly, showing me the mountain of noodles piled on his plate. I laughed, really laughed, and grabbed a napkin to wipe sauce off his chin. That's the best volcano I've ever seen, I said. And it hit me, right there, in that messy little kitchen filled with bad meatballs and good memories. I hadn't lost anything when Marla left. I'd gained everything I actually needed.